Okay, it's 2 o'clock and we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the webinar on advanced topics in financial management and cost allocation tools you can use. I'm Nancy Doherty, an analyst with the National Rural Transit Assistance Program. Of course, we'll start with a few housekeeping slides, as we always do. You're probably all very familiar with Zoom by now, but if you need help with your audio, there's a little button down at the bottom left-hand corner that you can use to adjust your audio settings. You can also use the computer audio, or you can call in using one of the numbers above. But if you do call in, make sure you put in the webinar ID number shown on the screen. You'll need that. As the slide suggests, use the chat for help or to share a comment, and then use the Q&A to submit questions, and use the raise your hand symbol to ask a question verbally. We do want to kind of hold the questions to the end of the two presentations, but if there's something that's really important and you feel like it's really timely and you want to ask it, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. And then lastly, the slides and a recording of the presentation will be available in a week or so on our website. The National Rural Transit Assistance Program, commonly known as National RTAP, is a technical assistance center funded by the FDA, the Federal Transit Administration. The center supports rural and tribal transit around the country by providing free training materials, transit-related resources, and several tech tools, including one of the ones that we're going to speak about today, the Cost Allocation Calculator. We are governed by a review board. It's 14 members. It consists of state, DOT, and rural and tribal transportation managers located throughout the country. They're effectively our boots on the ground, ensuring that we stay informed and provide tools that are useful to all of you. You can learn more about us at our new website, which was developed, little plug here, with another one of our tools, Website Builder 3.0. Next slide, yeah. So today's agenda, again, I'm Nancy Doherty with the National Rural Transit Assistance Program, and I'm glad so many of you were able to join us today. We will be discussing a new RTAP product, our Advanced Topics in Financial Management module, as well as upgrades to an existing tool, our Cost Allocation Calculator. Both of these resources were developed by the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. The new module is called Advanced Topics in Financial Management, which augments our Fundamentals Financial Management module that was released last year in 2020. So this new one focuses on two topics: service-based cost allocation and pricing and operating sponsored services. The service-based cost allocation chapter offers instructions not only on operational cost allocation, which a lot of us are familiar with at this point, but also capital asset cost allocation and local share contribution allocation. That's why it's called Advanced Topics. It also provides background and context for our two variable cost allocation calculator, which is why we're introducing both of these topics today. The pricing and operating sponsored service chapter, the second chapter in the book, discusses pricing and setting up agreements with third parties, such as human service agencies, and utilizing revenue and sponsored service in the context of federal grant requirements. So after the discussion of the new manual or the new module, we will present our updated cost allocation calculator. Todd will be doing that. The calculator is used to allocate operational costs and generate performance measures, and it was updated recently to be more user-friendly, offer instructional guidance as needed, and allow historical cost allocation data to be stored from year to year and then compared, which is a really nice little addition to the calculator. Both of these things are available on our new website. It can be downloaded very easily. To download either version of the calculator, you simply click on the button in the banner on our landing page, and Todd will be showing you how to do that in a few minutes. And then the support center page for the cost allocation calculator will provide links to the new instructional manual and 10 really well done new instructional videos and a few webinars introduced and demonstrated the applications. So our speakers today, two very talented individuals. Mike Walker, who will speak first, is a research scientist in the Transit Mobility Program at Texas A&M, at the Transportation Institute, more commonly known as TTI. Mike has 13 years of management and executive experience in public transit and over 14 years of experience conducting research, leading projects, and training. Mike specializes in transit planning, operations and scheduling, transit performance management and measurement, transit funding, and financial management. Mike's work helps transit agencies and other transportation providers bridge the gap between innovation, research, and practice. And Mike was one of the primary authors of the Advanced Topics module. Todd Hansen is an associate research scientist at TTI. He has over 9 years of experience, transportation research experience. His work focuses on best practices for public transportation agencies, innovative practices in on-demand transportation, accessibility to fixed route transit for persons with disabilities, analysis of transit agency operational and financial data, and transit cost allocation. Todd led the initial development and subsequent updates of the cost allocation calculator. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mike, who will tell you a little bit about our advanced topics in financial management new manual. Mike?
Hey, thanks, Nancy.
Yep.
Thanks everybody for being here today. So let's just dive in. We're going to take a quick look, overview of the advanced topics in financial management manual. Inside the manual is composed of 3 chapters. So obviously there's an introduction chapter that explains the purpose of the document so you can understand how it's organized and the key terms that we're going to use inside the manual. And then the two main, meat and potatoes of the manual are chapter 2, which is service-based cost allocation, and then chapter 3, which is pricing and operating sponsored service. And both of these chapters serve a different purpose, but they are very related. And particularly chapter 3 is dependent on chapter 2 in terms of being able to price service based on your costs. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's in chapter 2 and chapter 3, just to kind of give you some highlights and a sense for what they contain. In the service-based cost allocation chapter, that's chapter 2, that chapter contains first just some key foundational concepts to cost allocation. We'll provide you in that chapter basic guidelines for building a cost allocation model. We talk about the nuances when it comes to different types of costs. For instance, what costs are applicable to what services. We talk about allowability. We talk about other types of cost principles that are important to understand when you're building a cost allocation model. And we talk about transit functions, right? And particularly in the functions that are used by the National Transit Database and the Uniform System of Accounts, or the USOA. And then the chapter also goes into, as Nancy mentioned earlier, 3 different types of service-based cost allocation. And so when we say service-based cost allocation, we're using that term because you're using some element of your transit service, some sort of service data element, to allocate some sort of cost. And the 3 different costs that are talked about in this particular chapter are operational cost allocation. So these are your operational costs, not capital. This is what, like Nancy said, most of us are pretty familiar with this or have heard about it or know that it's a requirement. But we also have a chapter on capital asset cost allocation. What are some ways to allocate your capital assets? And then also, what if you are asking for local share from counties or cities or other groups locally that you may be serving? If you want some sort of contribution, how can you come up with a transparent and replicable way to do that? That's what we call local share contribution allocation. So this slide just shows an example. You remember I talked about that the chapter contains several different ideas in terms of cost concepts. This is one of those cost concepts. We call it the cost applicability concept. Not all costs that an agency will incur apply to every service. And so we label costs in terms of their applicability. Some are global, some are direct, some are specialized. And so we use the term, for instance, here, global shared, to represent a cost that is shared across all services. That cost is globally shared among all the services that you provide. We have several diagrams just like this in the manual that help to clarify some of these concepts that can be, on the surface, seem very daunting and confusing. And the 3 different types of service-based cost allocation, I mentioned them before. in terms of going into operational cost allocation. If you need to allocate your wages, fuel, parts, all those operational costs to services, we walk through the steps there. We also, in that section, will refer to tools like the 2 variable cost allocation calculator, that is the National RTAP product that you'll be seeing later. And we do give you step-by-step guidance in all 3 of these different types of cost allocation, literally walking you through every step that's going to take in order to get from your starting data point to your answer about how much of this cost gets allocated to your services. So that's a quick overview of chapter 2, the service-based cost allocation chapter. We wanted to spend most of the time highlighting what was in chapter 3, which is on pricing and operating sponsored service. And so we use the term sponsored service, and you can see the definition in the blue box on the right-hand side of your screen, to refer to any transit service that an agency is providing that's paid for under some sort of agreement, right, with one or more sponsors. And so we use the term sponsor to, like Nancy said, any third party, for instance, a human services agency, which is the most typical way we see this. And that entity, that third party, is paying for transit service. It can be in different types, and there's usually some sort of written agreement, right? So that's when we use the term sponsor to represent that entity, and sponsored service is the service you're providing under that agreement. So the chapter really goes into some level of detail about many different aspects of providing sponsored service. So for instance, if the service is being provided under a coordinated public transit human services plan, how does that work? What should you be thinking about? If you have multiple federal sponsors, or there's federal money helping to pay for this sponsored service, what do you need to be thinking about? How do you apply federal cost sharing policies and principles, particularly those published by the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility, or CCAM? We talk about other things that need to remember. How do you set service policies when you have multiple sponsors with all that might have different requirements? They might want trips very early in the morning or very late at night. And so how do you sort of balance all those, as well as deal with and maintain compliance with charter and school bus rules? And just how do you maintain consistency when between your general public service and your sponsored service? And how do you handle that? And so this chapter walks through some of those things to be thinking about, provides some guidelines and good practices to follow. We also cover, as you can see, using sponsored service revenue, so the money that's coming from a sponsored service agreement. How do you use that? Can you use that as match, right? And the short answer is yes, under most circumstances. No spoiler alert, but there you go. How do you set your price? That you're going to ask, these sponsors to pay, is it per passenger trip, per mile, et cetera? And what's that dollar value? And so we walk through those steps and things to think about. There's a little bit of guidelines for sponsored service agreements, as well as some helpful resources, because this is sort of a growing, there's more and more documentation available in this topical area. So we provide some things you can read. So, what I'm going to do for the remainder of this just small piece is just cover some what I call the foundational principles of sponsored service pricing. 3 main things. Again, we want you to read the manual, of course. So don't take what you have today and say, well, now I know everything. But some of the key foundations here are to be fair, right? The key takeaway is that if you have sponsors paying for a portion of service, they're going to want to pay their fair share. And of course, if it's a federal sponsor, it's required that they pay only their fair share, right? The allocable costs that are associated with the benefits they receive. So, that's one foundational principle. Your pricing needs to be transparent, right? Should be documented, should be easy to understand. You should be able to replicate that same, how did you decide that it's $50 per passenger trip? Right, that should be something that's very clear and transparent, assuming you're the one who's able to set the price in that case. And be consistent. That consistency becomes very, very important if you have, particularly if you have federal and non-federal sponsors, or you have both, or you have multiple sponsors, right? You don't want to have one price for one sponsor and not be able to explain why the price for another sponsor is different. And that wouldn't be good. Next slide. So in the guidebook, we walk through what we call the service price setting cycle, and then go ahead, Todd, you can advance it. At the start of this process, you need a cost allocation model. You need a way to understand how much your service actually costs to create. And so you have to have that cost allocation model set up and run, and you need to apply it to get results so that you can understand what your unit costs are. How much does it actually cost per mile, per hour to run your service? Once you have those results, then you can go to build your pricing model, which is, this is the way that I take those costs and turn them into a price that I'm going to charge sponsors. And then you have that pricing model set up, then you can figure out, well, then exactly what are the dollar values? Am I going to charge per trip, per mile, per hour, some combination of those things? And those are your service prices. You take those service prices, we build them into a sponsored service agreement, right? That documentation between you and the sponsor, that this is what I'm going to charge, this is what I'm going to deliver. And of course, then you need to, go ahead and do the billing piece, right? You provide the service and you bill. Now, in this whole cycle, we touch on all of these pieces in the chapter, but I'm going to focus today on just two. First, we'll focus on the pricing model aspect. How do you calculate your unit prices? And there's several different approaches you can take to setting your price, right? So, and this graph shows you a sort of a spectrum of approaches, from a high subsidy approach to a low subsidy approach. And on the high subsidy approach, this means that your revenue from your contract or from your sponsor, right, is actually covering a very small percentage of what actually costs you to deliver that service. And if the revenue is coming in as a small percentage of the actual cost, that means some other source of revenue is actually subsidizing, right, that trip, that passenger trip. It could be federal revenue, state, local revenue, as long as that's allowable. That's one approach, right? That's one approach. Now you can go to a balanced approach where I call it a moderate subsidy approach, right, where your contract revenue is getting close to the true cost of the service, is making up 50% or so. And you can even take it further. And really, when we write our recommendations for this, we really recommend that you charge as close as possible to the full cost of the service. That way, that the sponsored service is being paid for and is not having to be subsidized by other sources. A lot of this depends on your local goals and things like that. Now, it is possible, even in some cases, to go beyond this idea of a low subsidy where there's literally zero subsidy. And in some cases, you could have a service price that exceeds what it costs you to deliver the service, and that results in surplus revenue. Now, that in itself has its own set of issues and concerns. One, most transit agencies are not making a profit, and you're not supposed to be making a profit. And so how that money gets used, that surplus money gets used, is something we talk a little bit about in the manual. But again, just as in a nutshell, we're not recommending that you charge more than it costs. We recommend that you charge as much as it costs, but there might be cases where you have surplus revenue, and we walk through how to deal with that. This diagram is also included in the manual, provides you some ideas about what pricing approach you might want to take depending on your source of revenue. Is it coming from federal agency? Is it Medicaid and EMT? And this is our set of recommendations to help you think through, how much should you charge? Should you charge the fully allocated cost? Should you charge something else? Or are you allowed to charge something else? And so again, I won't walk through this entire thing today, but I just want you to know it's there in the manual. It's something that can help to guide your decision making. Okay, and then the next part I want to talk about in this cycle is service prices. So if we figured out how much of our costs we want to recoup, right? That's our pricing model. Now, how do we actually charge the sponsor? What service prices are we going to use? There's several different options, and we talk about all of these again in the guidebook. And this is just a small example of the total set of options or ways that you can approach this. This table walks you through. For instance, if you have passenger-based, you can use passenger-based unit prices, which are the bottom part of the table. And those work when you have shared ride service, right? When multiple sponsors or your general public passengers are riding in the same vehicles as your sponsored pass. And so you could use a per passenger trip price, per passenger mile, or even per direct mile, which is the distance between a passenger's origin and destination directly without, going, picking up other passengers in between. And, I won't walk through all the nuances when it comes to these, but it's important that each one of these service unit prices have pros and cons. Some are easy to interpret, others not. Some accurately reflect the cost of the service, others not so much. And so it's important to understand, and the guidebook walks through these and helps provide some general guidelines as to what might be the most approach in certain circumstances. You can go ahead, Todd. Thanks. Now, here's one example of the nuances that need to be considered. So if you're using a per passenger trip price, and let's say that our standard is to charge $50 per passenger trip for every sponsor. Well, one of the nuances with the per passenger trip price is when the passengers' actual trips differ in length considerably. For instance, the trips under sponsor A are about 2 miles per passenger, and the trips under sponsor B are about 10 miles per passenger. For whatever reason, right? This happens when, particularly if you've got long distance travel for medical appointments or something under one sponsor, but the other sponsor maybe is more in town kind of services. So what happens, of course, in this case is that if you carry the same exact number of people, 100 people for both sponsors, and you charge $100 per trip, both sponsors are going to pay you $5,000. But the reality is that doesn't reflect the cost of providing services for sponsor A and sponsor B. In effect, if you look at the far right-hand column, sponsor A is paying way more than they should. They're paying $25 for every mile the passengers traveled. And transit costs are driven by two things: time and money, time and distance. So if those passengers are traveling a smaller, less miles overall, then that sponsor should be probably paying less for that service compared to other sponsors. And so we provide some alternatives to deal with this kind of reality in the manual. You can skip this slide, Todd. Okay, and last, we do provide some guidelines for documenting your pricing model, giving you ideas about what to include when you document your pricing model, its design, the rationale, how you calculate unit prices, being sure that you're transparent, making sure you're excluding unallowable costs, particularly on your federal, if you're receiving reimbursement that's tied to federal funds. How often are you going to update your service prices so your sponsor knows in advance, do we expect every year, every quarter? When are these prices going to be revisited? And of course, if what you do or provide as an agency changes, then it's important to know that that pricing model might need to be updated. Okay, well, that's it. I hope I hope you get a chance to read the manual and enjoy it. And of course, if you have any other questions, we'll take them at the end. And I'll turn it over to Todd.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Mike. Great job. And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I want to let people know that we do have the manual available in paper format. So you can easily order it online, and we will send you as many copies as you need. So, or you can download the PDF. Okay. Anyways, all right. Thank you, Mike. Todd?
All right. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Michael. So yeah, this ties in nicely to some of the concepts that Michael just went over from the advanced topics module, and a lot of great detail in there that can help with cost allocation questions. And up next, for the updates to the cost allocation calculator, this is dealing with operational cost allocation. The calculator's been available. I believe we launched it in 2019, 2020, 2019 maybe. The years run together for me, but we've done some updates to it before, but we're pretty excited about this version 4.0 that is being launched now and available on National RTAP's website. So I'm going to go over the features in that. We think that Hopefully these updates will make the calculator a lot more user-friendly, a lot more guided instruction and support materials along the way, and some great features that I'll go over in a second. First, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the cost allocation calculator, I wanted to provide a little bit of background before I talk about the updates about what is this tool that's available. Essentially, in both either a Access application or a Excel application format, this is a tool that can help agencies of all sizes, but particularly targeted for usefulness for small urban agencies, rural agencies, tribal transit agencies, to help accurately allocate your cost of service and determine some of those factors that Michael was talking about in terms of potentially how is my service performing, how do I price my service, etc. And so the applications are available using data input steps for standard transit data. We tried to design it to rely on data such as your hours, miles, and trips that you regularly gather for your routes and services, and as well as your financial chart of accounts information and characteristics, and try to capture all the different nuances that in rural transportation you experience at your transit agencies. Also, it's available in Access and Excel, but both applications don't require special skills to use, and I'll demonstrate both applications later in this section of the presentation, particularly for those of you that are unfamiliar with using Access. Sometimes Access can be a little bit of a scary sounding program. The Access application is very click of a button, user friendly to navigate around. Michael was the chief architect of that application as well. So I'll demonstrate both, but just wanted to emphasize to give the Access database version a shot as well. So the calculator can help you allocate costs to individual routes and services. It does the calculations automatically with your data inputs, and it also can help determine the subtotals of costs for different groups of routes or services. So say if you have some routes that operate in an urbanized area or a specific county, and then you have other routes that operate in other places, it generates those subtotals as well. Also, a big thing that we want to emphasize that the calculator is able to do is you can allocate or sub-allocate your cost for a shared ride demand responsive service from that overall service to different local sponsors within the route, using passenger miles and passenger hours, and kind of what Michael was just discussing in terms of making that determination of that data by sponsor. The calculator can take that information and determine the cost for different sponsors within the same service, and both calculator application versions can do that. So I really want to emphasize that, and I'll show that as well in the reports. Both calculators have different export and report capabilities. They produce PDFs and Excel downloads that you're able to get from them, and I'll show you where you can get those. So we tried to make the calculator in terms of the process. Both of them follow these easy 4 steps. First, you enter your what we call service data. So this is what is the name of the route, what is the service area for it, is it directly operated service, is it purchased transportation service, 6 basic fields for each route or service that you have as part of your service portfolio. Then in step 2, you enter financial data, and this is based on USOA accounting codes, and we have some helpful resources in the instruction manual and training videos about what those USOA accounting codes correspond to your chart of accounts information. So where do things like operator salaries versus administrative salaries, fringe benefits, fuel, tires, we have those categories within the enter financial data step to enter your annual cost information into. Then in step 3, you enter your operational data. So this is your miles, your hours, and your trips. The calculator uses total vehicle hours and total vehicle miles to do the 2 variable methodology, but you can also enter your revenue hours and miles, and that can help with performance metrics that the calculator computates automatically. And then step 3 is also where you enter your sponsored services data. So the passenger miles and passenger hours for each individual sponsor within a router service as well. Then at step 4, at the push of a button from your data in steps 1 through 3, the cost allocation results for the annual year period are calculated, and subsequently you can get these results and outcomes from the application. So these are the things that we point to are very useful for using the cost allocation calculator, but this also applies to having a sound cost allocation process in general, in terms of you want to make sure that and this tool is useful for that you have a and this is along the lines of what Michael was saying, a consistent, transparent process for how you are determining the cost of services. And with this calculator tool, if you're using the same methodology for all your routes and services, that's very consistent across the board. It's useful for reporting data. If you, depending on what your situation is, if you do direct reporting as a full reporter to NTD or prepare data for the state, it's useful for that. Your cost of services and measuring performance, that comes out in the performance metrics in the reports. And then from that, you can use that for pricing of services, planning, knowing your costs for different funding sources. You can take that a step further with accounting and financial information, requests for reimbursements information, and then also being able to budget for anticipated future expenses and costs that are going to be for the routes or services, particularly now with the updates with historical information for each router service. You can see what the cost of that route is over time, and then better anticipate those expenses that you're going to experience. So here are the new features and that we have, and with our flashy new graphics right here. And I'll go over each of these, but basically these are kind of the main areas that version 4.0 really adds to the experience of using this tool. The main one, we emphasize over and over is now is the calculator is able to show cost allocation results over a range of years for your individual routes or your groups of routes, and you can make that comparison of the results in there. And I'll show what that looks like here in a moment. We also have different improvements in being able to edit data within each of the calculators and managing data in terms of whether you're exporting data or having to delete certain selections and make editing to that. We added some additional features there. We added some helpful resources for what we call process flowcharts, as well as improvements to the existing glossary on definitions. And both of these will help with kind of explanations of terms and then the calculations that the tool is using in the background. And I'll show an example of that. In Excel in particular, because Excel is kind of emulating a database, whereas Access is a database software, we did some specific improvements for display and entry of the records of information that are entered in the Excel application. And then finally, we have a training video playlist that does step-by-step walkthroughs of demonstrations for both the calculator applications available on the RTAP website. So first, with the historical reports, now we used to have just a single year that the calculator could produce, and then you would reuse the calculator essentially for a different period of time. Now we have a single year or active year report and then the multiple year reports or historical range of years. And these both come from the results in step 4 for your allocated costs and your performance measures. So each time in the calculator that you produce a set of results, those it will direct you to assign those to a single fiscal year. And you can only assign one set of results to one fiscal year, so you don't have overlapping. And then you can reuse the calculator in subsequent fiscal years saved in the application over time to then have a comparison report that gets generated. So with that, we have in the calculator an option to reset it for a new fiscal year, saving the data for your services that you have in step 1, so you don't have to re-enter your route information within that. You still have your set of routes, and then you would enter your new financial data information in step 2 and your operational data for that year, your hours, miles, and trips in step 3 for the next fiscal year when that time comes. And of course, you can also enter new routes or services that have come online. You can remove ones that are no longer in service or operation, and the calculator can still make that comparison between the common names. So this is an example. This is a very base example of a report for the historical results using some sample data that's entered. But essentially, the calculator can do these different reports for sets of routes or individual routes. This is by travel mode. So we have commuter bus, demand response, motor bus. It computates the cost differences, the percent change between the most recent 2 years, as well as if I had more than 2 years in this report, it would show the first year to the last year for the entire range. So it does those percentage changes at the bottom, and it does the same for our set of performance measures there. So you can see from here where the usefulness would come from, particularly for our cost efficiency and effectiveness measures for how is my demand response service performing over time. I can look at that from year to year, and the same for any other route groupings that we have. So this is our new report that we really want to show off, and I'll show you how that's generated in both applications. I mentioned data editing and management. Essentially, we have additional ways and aspects that you can do editing and export of data. Depending on the application, you can either export in the page that you are on in the application, you can export to an Excel, a separate Excel workbook, or you can produce PDF reports in different places. And we tried to add just basically in every possible place of the calculator applications where you can do export what you have in the application if you need to use it for some sort of external purpose. In Excel, in particular, previously, if you had used the calculator before, there used to be some kind of additional steps you had to do for deleting an entry or you had to delete an entry if you needed to edit something in it, and you had to delete a whole batch of entries. Now you can do that kind of in quicker steps. You can edit data quicker for routes or services. The data lists that appear in the pop-up menus, if you have experience with that, auto-populate now. And they also have a display of running totals to help check the data you've entered in steps 1 through 3 there. You can also use the calculator if you want to just put your cost information to a single route or service. That wouldn't be allocation per se, because you'd be taking all your costs and just putting it on one service. You're not allocating to separate services, but that could be a useful thing as well if you want to look at performance metrics that are outputs. I mentioned the process flowcharts. We have 3 process flowcharts that are embedded within the calculators and available in the instruction manual as well. that you can get online at RTAP's website. This is the process flow chart. There's also some additional instructions and step-by-step guide for how this works with the cost allocation process summary. So this is just the overall allocation process that is used. And so the intent of the flow charts is to kind of help provide some background for the allocations that are getting done and the calculations with the data that you input, make it less of a black box sort of application, and kind of help if you are using it for purposes that need some backup of explanation for reporting. This can kind of help with that explanation for what the calculator is doing in the background with that data that you input. In addition to this flow chart of kind of the overall process, we have another flow chart that's for sponsored route or service information in the process. And then we have details for shared versus specialized costs. So if you have costs that are applicable to all of your routes and services or a subset of routes or services, we have a very detailed flow chart that goes over that as well. And then the training videos, I'll show the website where these are available in a second. But we have these this playlist here. These are the topics that it goes over. We have an overview video just going over the basics of the application process. And then for each of the service data, financial data, operational data, and allocate costs and reports, we have separate videos for Access and Excel, and then a overall video on data management and help resources. So next, I'm going to transition to a demonstration. And let me go to start with our Access version. So I just want to show, I'll flip through quickly. Like I said, I think the training videos, if you're unfamiliar with the calculator, will be very useful for showing data entry itself. So I'm not going to do that for today, but this is just, showing for those of you that haven't seen before, in each of these steps, this is what the data entry process for the Access application looks like. You can see the running totals at the bottom. For example, we have these different cost entries and navigation. We have, in addition to being able to find the glossary for different terms here, we have links to those in each place. And I also want to point to the USOA codes that have definitions, following that USOA guidance on what different types of costs are within the application. And we have these expense codes details that are available within the application as well. To briefly show you on the operational data side, we have this set of routes here, and for any route that's entered as sponsored in the application, you have this option to allocate to separate routes or services. And so this is the menu where you can do that process and get that sub allocation of results. So once you have all that information in, I'm just going to overwrite the information that I have entered for 2023. And here is where it will say your results are ready for reporting. You can look at the active year or historical year. And this is where, in particular, for historical year outputs, I'm going to pick router service name. You can, there's a lot of different options for export and outputs here, but just to show as an example, have some pretty wild percentages here just because of the data that I entered. But you can see how the results change over time, has our operational costs, and this is for individual routes or services. So you can do this at the route by route level for these results, print the report to a PDF. You can also export the results to Excel within the Access application. A lot of different options essentially. So that's there's also, we have in the directions how to manage different historical years, but you can keep adding on. If you need to change a year, you can overwrite your existing information in different places. This is where we have the flowcharts available. I might need to put the new flowcharts in here, Michael, I just realized. but we have the flowcharts available in this page here, the original version of the flowcharts. In the version available on RTAP's website, it has the updated ones in the application. You can also do export your service data, do an export to a new Excel file that way, or delete data here. So a lot of different things. Before I go to Excel, Nancy, is there anything you wanted me to point out within the Access application that I missed?
The only thing I was going to say is it's pretty clear that no prior experience with Access is needed. It's a pretty easy application to use.
Yeah, it's great to hear, and we tried to design it to, for someone unfamiliar, this is just like, pretty point and click and enter into a cell like a familiar form. If you have issues with, you can actually use the Access version if you don't have a current license of Access. We have instructions in the instruction manual for a plugin you can get from Microsoft to run the Access application as well. And so please look at the instruction manual if you're interested in looking at using the Access version, which we encourage you to do, but you may not have a current license for it.
Yeah, and Mike, just to reiterate, when you save your data and your allocation results for a year, you do not save the financial or the operational data that you entered from year to year. Is that correct?
It saves the overall results.
Right.
It does save the operations data. So we have a report here just to show you. It does save the hours, miles, and trips information, but it won't save the individual cost entries in step 2. It will save the overall results from the allocation process. So if that's something you want to do from year to year from your entry, you can export before you reset the application. You can export the cost entries information before you reset it.
Kind of like any other calculator, once you send equal, it's kind of done, you're starting over again.
Right. So let me show you the same in Excel while we have a little time. Laid out, there's pretty similarly in terms of steps. There's less kind of dynamic data management, database management stuff as the Access calculator, but the overall processes are the same. In steps 1, 2, and 3, you enter your data. Everything works through a pop-up menu that you click to enter data. And then from here, you can enter in your different services. If you have a sponsored service, you'll have the option to click an additional menu that will come up. And we have a very step-by-step demonstration of that in the videos to look at for sponsored service. But each of these steps 1 through 3, work like so in terms of using these pop-up menus, entering in your data. We have these running totals that are available at the top of the screen. And then at the push of a button, you can do your run your cost allocation, and then generate your summary report for that year. You'll be prompted to enter in a fiscal year. In the Access application, you may have saw before that at the top, I had a fiscal year entered. Here it works, when you create that report. This is the summary report that comes out of it and kind of shows all the information together. You can export the summary table or these individual tables, export to an Excel workbook. And then in the navigation menu, you can either be navigated to that year's report. So this will just navigate me back to 2022. Or from here, you can generate a multiple year report. And so this will create a separate workbook that you can run. It takes a few seconds, but you can run and generate an Excel workbook that has all the individual tables for the results for the historical year report and the operations data in the same way as Access. Here is where we have the flow charts here that are available. And this, provides the unclipped version I showed you earlier, showing that walkthrough demonstration process of here's what's going on when you run cost allocation. Here's all the steps that the calculator is doing. You can also look at the same process. It's pretty similar, but at the sub allocation level for sponsored services on shared ride demand response transportation. And then our most complex flow chart because of the complexity of doing it, but for your because the calculator allows you to put a financial data cost entry to either all of your routes, to an individual route, or to a subset group of routes, and you can be as specific as you want to be with that. So for, I have costs that only apply to my fixed routes, but don't apply to my demand response routes. You can set that applicability in step 2 when you're doing that entry. And this shows what the calculator is doing to separate those costs and then add them together for your total cost of service. So we hope these are helpful to illuminate that process a little bit. And then here we have a filtered glossary that you can go to certain terms in each step of the process, or look at all of them like so. So that's the Excel application. And before we go to questions, I think I wanted to show just the website where these are available. We had a little graphic earlier, but if you go to RTAP's main page and then technology tools, there's a landing page for the calculator. Here's where you can download the Excel or Access version, and it gives a little background in terms of its usefulness. From here, you can go to the support page, which I already have open here. And this gives a little more background and provides the tools for including tools and helpful resources that can go into much more detail on and the instruction manual has instructions for what every single button in both applications do. This talks about all the data entry fields that are needed for each step. And then we also have these instructional videos that are available. So if I click on here and go to the playlist, this will take me to the YouTube playlist, and you can see from here all the different topics. You can listen to my voice more on each of these videos, and then I do a guided demonstration for all the primary features in the application. So I encourage you to check those out. Also, if you ever have any questions, we have that FAQ section at the bottom. Be sure to reach out to RTAP up here in the chat online, email, or phone. Regular business hours. I believe those are available for you. And then at the resource library, you can download the PDF of the advanced topics module that Michael discussed earlier.
Or order a paper version if you prefer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, if we can go to questions, we have a little time for questions remaining.
We do. We've got about 5 minutes, maybe a little over 5 minutes. So if anyone, you did a great job. You both explained things really, really well. I think the training videos are a great resource. There's 10 of them, and you won't need to look at all 10 because there's roughly, I think there's 2 that are generic to both applications, and then roughly 4 for the 4 steps for whether you're using Excel or Access.
Mm-hmm.
But they're short and sweet. What are they, like 10 minutes long each?
They're usually between 3 and 6 minutes. So yeah, you won't be able to hear the audio from this, but just to show kind of, let me mute myself so I don't hear myself in the earpiece. But you can see on the video, there's voiceover narration for everything that's going on, and then kind of a walkthrough of entering in data into each of the steps. Of course, I'm at a place in the video where there's not a lot happening, but it's a guided demonstration that you can see in real time. So I think we have a question in the chat on the Excel document. I guess that's with downloading the new version of the Excel from the website. We'll check on that to make sure it's downloading correctly. It could be a file name issue or something like that, but we'll check on that promptly and apologize for that.
And again, I do want to reiterate that these guys are both available for technical support. So if you do contact National RTAP, and one of the ways that Todd showed you, if we can't answer the question, we'll be forwarding the question to one of them, and they're really great. They'll call you and walk you through any problems that you're having.
Absolutely.
Both, like I said, both are very easy to download. We used to, in the old days, we had something called a cloud account, and you had to set that up. We've gotten rid of all of that with the new website. You just click on one of those buttons. You do have to fill in like your name and your email, only because we have to report the number of downloads to FTA. But it's pretty simple, assuming that it's working correctly. And I'm not sure that that's a problem for everybody, but we will look into that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Not seeing any other questions. There was a survey. Oh, wait a minute. Let me see. There was just a slide, the TACL slide. Okay, you guys have that up. FDA would like us to remind you that we do have this new coordinated library. It provides all sorts of resources to you if you're providing coordinated services. So we hope that you'll check it out. It's available on our website and all of the technical assistance centers that you see here that are listed. And then finally, again, this is our contact information, which you've all seen before, and the two links to download either the manual or the calculator. When I end this webinar in a minute, there will be a survey that'll pop up. We really appreciate you taking the time to fill it out. That really helps us to do a better job next time. I think these guys did a great job today, but your input's always helpful. I guess with that, I think we're actually finished 4 minutes ahead of time. And Todd and Michael, thank you again for a great job in providing National RTAP two great resources for rural and tribal transit, as well as our state DOTs.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.